Dr. Elvin B. Thompson serves as the senior pastor of Riverside Apostolic Church in Augusta, Georgia, with his partner in life and ministry, Lady Valerie M. Thompson. They're both here today. A preeminent scholar, Dr. Thompson attained his doctorate in Bible philosophy and theology, a master's degree in theology, a Bachelor of Business degree with a concentration in corporate human resource management, ministerial licensing, and ordination from Aeon Bible College, and he is a certified mediator in workplace disputes with the Justice Center in Atlanta. In addition to that, Dr. Thompson is the 2001 Distinguished Graduate of the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute and a 2005 Graduate of Leadership Augusta. A retired First Sergeant from the United States Army, Dr. Thompson faithfully served his country for over 22 years. He is a combat veteran of 2 wars, Operation Desert Storm Shield and Operation Iraqi Freedom. He is the recipient of many awards, including the United States Army Bronze Star Award. Dr. Thompson is the author of several books: The Blood Running Through My Veins, Life's Critical Moments, 25 Steps Away, The Ancient Jewish Wedding, and The Rapture of the Apostolic Church, including many others. And today, he will be speaking very specifically about his most latest publication, Dear Mrs. Payton. Dr. Thompson's bi-weekly podcast. What does he not do, right? So Dr. Thompson's bi-weekly podcast, Keep the Fire Burning, has an international audience, y'all, worldwide, including Germany, Spain, Nigeria, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, Canada, India, and several other places. And with that, there's so much more I could say, but it would take us the entire time today to mention all of his accolades. But with that, let's give your undivided attention and give a warm GMC welcome to Dr. Elvin Thompson.
Thank you so very much, Professor Johnson. It's such an honor to be here with you. Certainly appreciate your hospitality and all of the coordination that has went into making today possible. Certainly to the Vice President. We're so glad that you are here. Yeah, that's right. That's good. Sanders, thank you so very much. And certainly the President, Miss Jaleesa Moore, who's just a ball of energy. You know, she'd be bouncing off walls right about now if she was here. You know, but certainly we're grateful to be here with you all, and to all of the staff and all of these great students here at GMC. What an honor it is for us to be here on this campus. Professor Johnson asked me, was this the first time I've been here to tour the campus? I said, yeah, it has been, but it won't be the last time. What a wonderful campus, and been studying up on the history and just what you all do across the state of Georgia and your different campuses. This is really a good niche. It is really a good launching pad for a lot of students, and I think I'm going to have to champion you just a little bit more than I have. What a wonderful day. We're certainly glad to be with you. Won't be here too long with you, but listen, we're celebrating this month, as you all do across the United States, Black History Month, African American History Month, and so many other colloquialisms and phrases we use to talk about this month. Many times people talk to us about these ethnic observances that we have, the different ethnic observances we have throughout the year. Many people say, well, when will there be a time when the country no longer have to have these ethnic observances and things like that? We no longer have to have a Black History Day or Native American History Day or whatever that day happens to be. And the reality is that that's the hope for all of us. Yeah. Everybody wants that. I think everybody wants us to come to a time when we no longer have to have a set-aside day to celebrate any group that is in America. That's not today. we still have work to do. We've come a long way. And when history is taught in its most complete format, and everyone is included in that history, and that history is taught on a regular basis every single day, K through 12 and on, then we no longer have to have these type of days. Until then, we've got to set apart some time so that we can talk about the contributions of everybody in the United States. That's why I'm so excited to be here, especially with the ASJ hosting this event, because this is what it's about. It's about working together collectively. And this story that I'm sharing with you all today is just one of my favorite stories. I actually stumbled upon it by accident. I collect a lot of African American history antiques and books and a lot of things. And normally when we were not in this pandemic like we are right now, for the last 7 or 8 years, we were the Augusta and Richmond County Public Library System each year hosted our books for like 3 months, from January to March. They would host that collection of all of our books up there in the Georgia room. Great people down there, just a wonderful staff with the two Tanyas up there. So if you're ever at the Augusta and Richmond County Library, go upstairs and you'll meet the two Tanyas up there in the Georgia room, and they do such a great job. But one of the things that I do is collect this history, and I stumbled upon, by accident, just purchasing some things and trying to build a collection, these postcards. When I got them, I thought they were interesting, but I really didn't spend time really looking at them. I just kind of put them away in one of the boxes until about a year ago, when I decided to take them out and really take a hard look at them. And when I did, I realized that this is history that needs to be told. This is a history, not just American history, but this is history about us right here in the CSRA. It is our history. It is history that is often overlooked, and until last year when I read the cards, I didn't even realize that it existed. And as I just said, I go to the public library every year and put my collection on there to view for 3 months and still didn't know this history. And so I wrote a book. I wrote a book about it because I thought someone needs to know about it, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. The book is Dear Miss Payton, Postcards from the Faith Cabin Library System. And that's what these postcards are about. They are postcards that I received, and the postcards were written, and they were correspondence between this lady named Miss Payton of Illinois and the curator of what came to be known as the Faith Cabin Library Systems. Let's talk about it a little bit. Of course, it takes place right after the Great Depression. We know the Great Depression around 1929. All across the South, segregation, as we all know, was just the order of the day. That's the way it was then. One of the issues, though, that I think is critical is that during this time of segregation, access to public libraries was being denied to people of color. It's one thing to deny a person the right to sit at a counter to eat. It's another thing when you deny a person the ability to get an education, to learn, to study, to grow. Access. When we deny a person access, then what we have the ability to do is put stumbling blocks in their way for success. When we give people access, then what we're doing is helping them now along their journey to be successful. And in many cases, all we can really ask is a seat at the table. Just let us, what we do with that seat is up to us, but at least let me have a seat at that table. Access was being denied to them that use the public library system. Of course, here in the CSRA, we have regional libraries all across, from here to Edgefield, down past Rennes, and everywhere else. There was just regional, small little libraries. There was not a library system at that time. In fact, the public library system of Augusta and Richmond County did not come into play until around 1944. It was 1944 when they came together and it became state funded in 1944. When it became state funded, it was still exclusive. It was still segregated. So minorities still could not utilize that public library system. In response to that, these things called Faith Cabin Library Systems came to be, which offered library services to the rural African Americans all across the segregated South, to give them the ability to have some type of access to some books. Books are important. You know, I know that I'm a little older, and I do have, Kindle readers and things like that on my iPads and phone. So I'm getting there. I'm jumping into the future, into the present as it is. But I like old books. I like to hold it. It's something about holding a book, reading a book, smelling the book that just does something for all of my senses. And so I'm just kind of crazy like that. So don't mind me with that. But I like that. And I like something about books because books are something that you can take with you. But not only can you take a book with you, a book can take you places you've never been. Books have the ability to put you in worlds that you have not even thought about going to. They transport you from the moment that you begin to read it, from wherever you're at and whatever you're doing, and put you into a place where you're able to see something different. And that is powerful. That is a powerful thing, because if all you know is what you see, that can stagnate you. But when you can see that there can be a difference, there can be another way, there is something outside of the four walls that I live in, that gives a person hope. And isn't that important?
Yes.
Hope is everything. Give a person hope, and you give that person almost the air they breathe. You give them a breath of life, and give them the ability to think that things can be different. So what happened in the early 1930s? Coming out of the Depression, this impoverished white meal worker up in Saluda County, South Carolina. This man by the name of Mr. Willie Lee Buffington. He is the one who started these libraries. I think it's very important because we're talking about during the segregated South. During a time when races just didn't get along. This man started something to help a group that he was not a part of. And isn't that a human thing to do? That's just humane. That's just humanity. That's just people helping people. And I believe that's what we all want in life. To get to a place where we're just people who help each other. And that's what he did. His first library that he started, he named it after his mother. He named it the Lizzie Coon Unit up in Saluda. It was a small freestanding log cabin. And they opened it on December 31st, 1932. This is what it looked like. This is opening day for the Faith Cabin Library up in Saluda. You can see it was a festive day. This was huge. It was nothing but a small log cabin. It was just a log cabin that they just put some pieces of wood. There was no heat. There was no insulation. There was nothing but dirt floors. But for them, it was an awesome day because now they had access. They would have access to books. They would have access to calendars, magazines, things that we take for granted now that they just did not have readily available to them. You can see Mr. Buffett, he's standing here in the middle as he's looking at some of the students, and they are standing around. I'm talking about, it was like a circus, a carnival or something that day, how they celebrated the opening of that small log cabin. You also realize that at the same time that this log cabin was opening, we were getting ready to go, coming out of Depression, and we're going into World War II. And when we go into World War II, many blacks participated in that war, just as we participated in every war that America has had. Don't always get the recognition, but we participated in every war. And we participated, male and female. Over 1 million African Americans participated in World War II. 125,000 African Americans were overseas fighting in that war. And what makes that so interesting is that we call this a time for minorities, African Americans. We call it the time of the double war. It was a dual war going on. Because on the one hand, they're fighting a war overseas for others. And at the same time, they were having to fight for democracy, the right to exist, the right for equality back home. So you got this dual war. I'm fighting for my country. I'm putting my life on the line. But at the same time, the country that I'm putting my life on the line for don't even recognize me. They don't recognize my citizenship. Do you understand how patriotic you have to be and how much you have to love this nation? To put your life on the line for a nation that does not even recognize your humanity in its full breadth. So we were fighting overseas, fighting for democracy, and still at the same time being treated like second-class citizens, not even being allowed to go into the library. You can't even go in there and check out a book. But you can go fight our war. Think about that for a moment. That's just crazy to me. I spent 22 years in the Army. I fought multiple wars. And to think that while I'm over in Iraq, Afghanistan, or one of the other places I've been, and to think at the same time that my children couldn't even go to the library system back here in America is just beyond my imagination. But that's exactly what was taking place at that time. Thank goodness that people like Mr. Buffington exist, because he filled a niche that was absolutely needed. Faith cabin libraries. They were housed in these makeshifts, one at a time, being built log cabins. They built one at a time. The reason why they called them faith libraries was because Mr. Buffington said we didn't have nothing but faith. So we didn't have no money, so each time we decided we're going to build a library, it was going to take faith that we had to stand on to think that we could get it done. And of course the name cabin, because they were log cabins, and hence you get the term faith cabin library systems. Next slide. And while Mr. Buffington is credited with starting the libraries, it was his relationship with this African-American man, Mr. Uriah E.W. Simpkins, who was the inspiration behind the libraries. Now, it just so happens that Mr. Simpkins is a lot older than Mr. Buffington, but they lived close to each other. And in order for Mr. Buffington, when he was a little boy, to get to school, he had to cross over the land of Mr. Simpkins. And so on his way back and forth from school, or coming back to school, coming from school, he and Mr. Simpkins would sometimes bump into each other, and they started a dialogue. This little white boy and this old black man started talking. It is something that happened when you start talking. I mean, amazing things happen when you just communicate a little bit. When you just say, hey, listen, I'm going to take a chance, I'm going to take a risk, I'm going to jump out here, I'm going to talk to somebody. I'm going to talk to somebody who looks different from me, thinks different from me, who may not look like me, but I'm going to talk to them. Just a conversation. They struck up a conversation, and through that, a friendship ensued. That friendship ensued so much that even when Mr. Buffington was young, and he was getting ready to get out of high school, and he was thinking about not going on to college, there was Mr. Simpkins who had to get on him and motivate him and tell him, yes, you are going to college. You're going to get out of here, and you're going to go. I mean, he gave him the push. A black man. And Mr. Buffington went on to college, got his education, came back home. Well, when he came back home, by that time, Mr. Simpkins was now working as a school teacher. He's working as a school teacher at the Red Hill School in Saluda County. When Mr. Buffington comes to that school to visit him, he realized there's something strange here. There's a school without a library. There's no books here. How are you being educated with no books? Wow. And it bothered him. It bothered him so bad that there were no books in there that he said to Mr. Simpkins, we've got to do something about this. But how are we going to do it? I mean, we don't have any money. How in the world are we going to do something about getting books in here and fixing it so there can be a library system for all kids? Well, Mr. Simpkins told Mr. Buffington, he said, well, if you are able to do something and you're willing to do something, I'll give you $1 a month. Now, that $1 may not seem like a lot, but when you think about the salary that he had back then, he was giving up quite a bit. But he was saying, if you're willing to do this, I'm willing to sacrifice too. You make a sacrifice for us, and I'm going to join you in making that sacrifice. And I think that's something awesome. Because I would never ask someone to sacrifice and I not be willing to sacrifice myself. If I ask you to sacrifice and put something on the line, shouldn't Should I be willing to put something on the line too? If you got to take a risk, should I be willing to take a risk as well? And that's what these two gentlemen decided they're going to do. They're going to take a risk, and they're going to work this thing. So Mr. Buffington decides, the way I'm going to do this, he was a part of the Methodist Church. And so the Methodist Church had these magazines, quarterly magazines that they would get. And he said, well, in that magazine, they list all of our churches. They list the leadership in all of our churches. So why not send letters to all of them and ask if they would be willing to at least take up some books at their congregations and send books back down here to the South that we can use, books that they've already used. They're not going to do anything with magazines they've already read. They're going to throw them away anyway. What about just sending those books down here? And we've got some kids who can utilize those. Those things that you think are garbage. It's not so much garbage to these kids down here. So instead of throwing them away, send the books down here to us. And we're going to utilize them. You would have thought that everybody in the Methodist Church would have jumped at it and said, well, that's the least we can do. But the reality is that he wrote letters. He wrote letters to 5 ministers whose names were listed in that Sunday school publication and asked them each for books. He only got a response from one. Nobody else sent him anything. No one else corresponded with him. One minister, Reverend King, of St. Mark's Methodist Church up in Harlem. He took up 1,000 books from his congregation, and he sent those books down, and those books became the start of what we now know of as the Faith Capital Libraries. That library in Saluda, those first books that went on those little makeshift stands came from Harlem, New York, where Reverend King had taken those books up from his congregation and sent them down here so that the kids down south could utilize them. It was through Mr. Buffington's letter writing campaign, because even though he only got one response, he kept writing. He didn't give up. He didn't just quit and say, well, nobody's going to do anything. He just started writing some other people. That's determination right there. Yeah. I mean, I like that, because that's what I try to teach people, that you just can't give up. Just because you hit an obstacle, a roadblock, you got to find a way around it. You got to keep going. You got to push past that. You got to find another way. Sometimes you got to take 1,000 no's before you get one yes. But that one yes will make it all worthwhile once you get it. And so he just kept writing. He kept sending these letters asking for donations. And after doing so, in all, he was able to build over 100 small libraries across the states of South Carolina and Georgia. These libraries everywhere. Little small, makeshift libraries. In fact, one of the libraries was housed on the campus of what is now Payton College. In fact, this picture that you see right here is Mr. Buffington, who was on staff at Payton College. And this is his office with all those books coming in. And he would take these books, put them in his car, and then drive them across Georgia and South Carolina to the different locations. And this is him sitting at his desk. You can see his little typewriter there in front of him. I know we don't use that anymore, and I'm kind of glad about that. But this is him right there on the campus of Payton College. And the Faith Capital Library had one location that operated out of Payton College. And it operated all the way up into the 1970s. Right there on the campus of Payton College. We don't talk about that. Well, why? And I think that's kind of important. That is a huge piece of history. It's a huge piece of history that this white man was working on staff at this predominantly black college during that time. And not only was he working at this college, but he also had been on staff at Benedict College. Yes, up in Columbia. He had been on staff at Benedict College. He dedicated his life. He became a minister in a Methodist church. I guess that's why I'm drawn to the story. You know, he became a minister in the Methodist church at the prompting and urging of Mr. Simpkins, who was telling him, you got a heart for this. If anyone should be a preacher, it should be you. The way you think and the way you love and way you consider people, you're right for that. He pushed him, and he became a Methodist minister there. And he worked on these two staffs, and he just continued to do great work. And this book that I wrote is about him writing this correspondence. Because what happened, next slide, it's between 1946 and 1959. One of those letters ended up reaching a lady in Illinois. Well, it reached the church, the Methodist church in Illinois. If you read the book one day, you'll find out a little more about her. But it reached the Methodist church up in Illinois, where she was the head of several of the departments of the Methodist church up there. She was on many of the boards and staffs across there, so she was able to get things done. When she said she wanted to get some things done, she knew how to get it done. She wasn't the type of lady who was going to take no for an answer. So when she put her mind to something, she made it happen. And she started collecting hundreds and thousands of books and calendars for the Faith Capital Library system, and she would send them down regularly, almost monthly. She was sending books and calendars and probably more stuff than they really wanted. She was sending them down there. And you'll know that when you read, if you look at some of the postcards themselves, you realize that this may not be something they really want, but they can't say no, and because they don't want her to stop sending what they do need down here to them. So she would send these books. And as she sent these books and calendars and things back, every single time that she sent a book, a pack of books or letters or something, Mr. Buffington would handwrite a thank you postcard. He would sit down at that desk at Payton College, and he would write a thank you card, and he would send it back to her to say thank you for the books. This book that I'm talking about contains the correspondence there. And when you read these cards, you hear the humanity. You hear this white man corresponding with this white lady in Illinois about helping black kids down south. Wow. That's amazing. That tells you what can be done when we come together. That tells you what happens when people forget about color and just think about humanity. They would write these letters back and forth. Sometimes if she didn't hear from him, when he finally got a chance to write, he would send a card to her and say, well, I apologize for not corresponding with you sooner, but this has been going on. Now you get a glimpse at what's going on in his life. You hear about when his wife was sick, so he couldn't correspond back. You hear about when his father died. And so during that time, he didn't write back to her. Then there are times when things were going on so hectic and money was so small that he wrote to her finally and said to her, I apologize because we just didn't have enough funds to be able to even correspond with you during this time. And then there are times when he didn't write back at all. Now enters another lady. A lady by the name is Mamie Dyer. Miss Mamie Dyer now is a black lady up in Edgefield County. She's a school teacher at one of these schools. She's the curator of one of these Faith Capital libraries. So she starts corresponding back and forth. She's writing postcards back up to Miss Payton. The title of the book, Dear Miss Payton. Well, the title of that book comes from this. Every single postcard begins like this. Dear Mrs. Payton. Every time you read one of the postcards, that's how it begins. Dear Miss Payton, thank you, or something to that effect. And you hear this correspondence that goes on all the way up to 1959. This correspondence, as she's continued to send books. These libraries are continuing to be needed because segregation is still running rapid across the South. These libraries continue to operate all the way up into the mid-1970s. That's not too far away, you know. That's not that long ago. Just in case we were thinking that this thing is far off. they operated all the way up into the 1970s. There was a need for these libraries because even though, President Truman had, signed some executive orders and things and said that segregation is, not in keeping with the Constitution and we got to get rid of that. Well, not everybody readily jumped on that, as we know. And so, it took a little time. It took a while for, integration to happen at multiple levels. And not just in restaurants and buses, but in school systems, but in library systems, just so people can have a right to go in and pick up a book. All the way to the 1970s. Those postcards. I brought a few of them for you. This is what those postcards looks like. Yeah. I'm gonna sit. That's okay. I'm gonna sit a couple of them down here, and then when you all finish, you can come around and look at a couple. But these are the actual postcards, and you will see. On the top of the postcard, for instance, this postcard here, at the top of this postcard it says, it has the stamp, Faith Cabin Library, Payton College, Augusta, Georgia, June 26, 1958. And of course it has the stamps and all there. And this is the way it reads. Dear Miss Payton, I should have written before this late date. This has been a very busy year. I was wondering if the truck ever came south. If so, he must have left the books at Exposition, Georgia. We established 6 new libraries this year. I hope you are, I can't really read it. Something. Our daughter is getting ready to marry. So he's talking about his daughter now getting ready to marry. And he talks about the boy he's going to marry. And he talks about a book that was written, Buffington's Dream, that had been written, and asking have they read that particular book. Isn't that something? And then it is signed in his handwriting, W.L. Buffington. Yeah, we don't write like that today. I tell people when you're reading some old things, sometimes you have to read a little more. This is one that I was telling you about, that when he couldn't respond, or didn't respond, that Miss Mamie Dye would respond to. And of course, hers is coming from Exposition, dated 6 January 1956. And of course, she begins the same way. Dear Miss Payton, thank you. Thank you for the Christian Advocate, which is one of the magazines that she sent. And she continues on in that manner. These postcards, I think, are a treasure. I think that these postcards offer us a glimpse into a past that offers us a glimpse at some of the worst of times, but also gives us a glimpse of some of the best in people. Because in a dark time when segregation was the order of the day, and there were issues greater than the issues that we have with racism today, those issues was far and deeply rooted in the South. There were people who were willing to go against the norm, go against the grain, and just step across the line. And it took both. It took Mr. Simpkins, this black man being willing to talk, and he's risking his life, because he could really get in some trouble back then just because of how things were. But he takes that chance and he talks to this young white man, this young white boy befriends this older black man. Miss Payton, up in Illinois, who is not living through what we're living through down in the South at the time. But it takes them and Miss Mamie Dye, the teacher, all working collaboratively together for one common cause, justice. What's right? What's fair? When we study Black history is not about one group being above the other one. Black history is about what's right. I mean, really, at the end of the day, what's fair? What's equitable? If we cannot realize the real dream of equality in its fullness, can we get a little closer to what's equitable? Can we get a little closer to a place where we recognize people not for their ethnicities, their cultures, their languages, their races, the countries they come from, the religions they have? We recognize them because they're humans. And that right there links us in a greater way than anything else. And we see that in these cards. Dear Miss Payton, it's about the Faith Capital Library System. That library system operated across Georgia and South, started right here in the CSRA, because this was the greater CSRA during that particular time, and it continued all the way up until 1970, and I think it's a story that everybody needs to read. Faith Capital Library Systems, thank you all so very much.
Thank you. Another hand, another hand. Thought that we would get actual artifacts today to kind of look at. So please don't touch them. But on your way out, you may take a closer look. The penmanship is stunning. Like for those of you in the back, you could not believe. Hey, Professor Miller, I shouted you out earlier. Yeah, all right. But yeah, so if you are they allowed to look? Yeah, we allowed to look, but not. Please don't touch. Please don't touch. And so. We do want to thank you though, Dr. Thompson. Now you know we were not going to let you just go away without having some way of saying, giving you our gratitude for being here today.
Oh, thank you so
So
much.
on behalf of the entire GNC, faculty, staff, and family, and in particular the Alliance for Social Justice, just a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you so
Thanks.
very much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all so much for being here and paying attention to me.
So I want to thank you. So we got a little bit of time. Any questions for Dr. Thompson? Yes, ma'am.
Where can we buy the book?
I have a couple of copies here, and they're $10 here. But you can go on Amazon and you can get the books from Amazon. Or you can see my bookstore up on Amazon with all of my books up there. And of course, on Amazon, it's $13. I can't help you with that piece. But they are available across. Just type in Dear Miss Payton, and they'll pop right up for you, and they'll give them to you.
Are you willing to sign my copy when I buy mine today?
Oh, you're glad to sign.
Come on. All right.
Okay.
I'll do it first.
Okay, not just yet. Hold on. Wait, I still got time. Any other? That's a perfect question. Other questions about? Yes.
I have one. As far as the postcards are concerned, have you thought about possibly laminating these things so they don't deteriorate?
I'm thinking about doing that. I usually keep them. Got a kind of sophisticated little system at home with some museum type books, boxes and stuff that we keep all of it in. But yeah, we thought about that and may just do that. One of the problems, my concern, of course, with that is, you only have the original one time, and so on.
Will it decrease
But
the
absolutely,
value?
it has the ability. Because, if you don't get it right the first time, you got to do it.
Yeah, you could really hurt it. Oh wow. I have a question. So, how did you stumble upon all this? I've lived in Augusta my entire life, 40 plus years. Never heard of the Faith Capital System. Been going to the libraries, like you said. So, can you mind just telling us, like, how did you, what was your process in terms of the research here? How you got to the stories?
Well, first of all, because I'm in a network of people who collect And one of the projects that I was working with in Edgefield, I work with the Edgefield Genealogy Society a lot,
Okay.
and out in Columbia County as well. And so we worked a project a while back on what's called the Genes Teachers. I don't know if anyone ever heard of the Genes Teachers, but dealing with the training of black teachers, school teachers, back during that time as well, and how they were educated and trained across the South, which took place also across Columbia, South Carolina, back down through here as well. Just working through those things, I was able to get a lot of information through that research, and ended up, that's why I say I stumbled on the cards, actually doing research on education system, the education system for teachers, for school teachers here. And then once I got the cards themselves, then the information in the card allows you then to begin to do the research, because it tells you certain states, it tells you certain places, it gives you about magazines to look in, and so you start looking in some of the archives. Great thing we have Google now, because now you can Google those magazines. Many of them now are up on the web, so you can go back and see that, and you can find Miss Payton was all over the place up in Illinois, well known across the state of Illinois. She actually had a training program where she trained nurses up in Illinois. And so just walking through all that information and then going on the campus of Payton College and trying to find out just where this office was at, that we still don't know, because they don't know themselves, because they were not fully aware of the story themselves prior to me making them aware of it. So it's tedious work. It's just, it's painstaking. It's, turning over one rock and, finding nothing until you turn over 5 more, and hopefully you find something.
Have you ever spoken to any surviving family members of the Buffingtons or?
Well, most of Mr. Buffington's family members passed away. There was some, the state of South Carolina actually did a story, University of South Carolina did a story on Faith Cabinet Library Systems a while back, because there's only 2 libraries that I think remain at this time that are still standing. They are museums right now, not funded, and so of course they're not where they need to be at right now, but at least they are still in existence at this particular time. And so they were a great help in getting a lot of information from the University of South Carolina.
Nice. Any other questions? Any other questions? All right, with that.
I was like, how long did it take you to actually write the book?
About a full year.
Yeah.
I started at the end of December of 2020, and then started putting the notes down and working through it and back and forth. I use, so you all know that my editor for most of my books have been my old English teacher back home. I'm from Alabama, back home in Alabama. And so I figured, since she was able to red ink all my papers up when I was in school, send it back in such awful shape to me, she would be a great resource for helping me. And she really was so gracious in her time and doing it for me until she ended up passing away in the middle of us last year. And so it took us a little more time, because I had to find somebody else to take care of that. So about a year.
How many cards were there in total?
I think it's a total of 63 cards.
Over how many years?
From 1946, the first card, to 1959.
And then Professor Mellon, I think.
I'm sure there's many of us who have family history that we may never know about. But you said you're from Alabama. I was raised in Alabama, and so in an effort to kind of learn more about my family history, I am discovering that, like many of us who are Black in here, we're potentially the descendant of enslaved people. And so what would you suggest to people who are putting in an effort to find out more about their family history, but are potentially hitting lots of roadblocks when it comes to either certain information being non-existent due to the Civil War or anything like that? What are some words of advice you give?
Great question. The first thing that I say to you, start right now. The greatest advice I tell anyone is start with oral history. If you have the oldest relatives that you have, one of the first things you want to do is record them. Just get them to talking about whatever. You know, if you got to give them a Coke, give them a Coke and let them sit there and talk to you. And every time you have a phone call with them, you just record it and get the information as much as you can, because the oral history is some of the greatest history, going to give you some direction of where you need to be. Of course, then you have the ability to go online to different sites like Ancestry.com. For African Americans, you got AfricanAncestry.com, 23andMe, companies like 23andMe, which deals with the 23 chromosomes, DNA chromosomes that they extrapolate from. And then there's a place called GEDmatch. GEDmatch, once you get your DNA out there in, say, 23andMe or Ancestry.com, then you can actually download your actual DNA file and upload it into GEDmatch. And what it'll do then, once you upload it into GEDmatch, it will allow you to get a DNA profile of people who have that DNA link. And it will show you email addresses and phone numbers for those who approve of that, of course, and allow you then to contact one another to be able to start a dialogue with things like that. But it's going to take leg work. It's going to take a lot of footwork. And then the issue is that you're going to, no matter how far you go back, especially when you're dealing with African American history, you're going to end up hitting what we call the 1865 wall. Yep. You're going to hit that brick wall where it's hard to now move back and move now actually into who were the owner of the slaves, what was the plantation. But there are some good books out there that deals with when you hit that brick wall. One's called Navigating the Brick Wall. I think it's called Navigating Through the 1865 Brick Wall. That is out there. And then, of course, if you're up on social media, there are different social media groups where people voluntarily will help you. The genealogy societies here, Edgefield, Columbia County, all of them are great. They have people volunteer their time to work with you. I volunteer. I just don't have as much time as I used to. But, you know, to try to help people just kind of work through that process.